Hey everybody, how are we doing? It's just about time to get started. And I just want to say a quick hello to our wonderful speakers, Liran and David. How you doing, guys?
Hey, doing great.
Looking forward to hearing your talks. Thank you so much for everybody who is joining us. And I think we've all had time to find our virtual seats. So let's get started. And what I would like to do first is just welcome everybody who's attending and our speakers to the 4th Dublin Developer Relations Meetup. It's Dublin because we're based in Ireland, but it is a virtual online meetup. And we do that to try and be as inclusive as possible. We really love the fact that we can have speakers from all over the world, and that we can have attendees from all over the world as well. I love actual meetups in person. I love the pizza and the beer and all that sort of stuff. But at the same time, we think there is space for something like this where there are no physical boundaries to attending. And it opens it up to everyone. We've had speakers from all over the world, from Africa, all sorts of places like that. And I think that makes this meetup really, really effective and really great for, especially for people who are learning about developer relations. So thank you very much for joining us, and thank you for helping to build this community and for supporting our speakers. So you can view the meetup as you're probably doing now without logging in, but if you want to chat, you should register the veto system. We're aiming for about 15 to 20 minutes for each talk, and then sort of a 5 to 10 minute chat session afterwards. So submit your questions in the chat, and then we'll read them out and we'll see what our speakers have to say. This is a community meetup, and if you want to get involved and help, please get in touch. We do BoxGig sponsor it, but it is very much for the community. And the purpose of the meetup is to learn about the practice of developer relations, to learn from each other and to help each other, and to foster our communities and understand how to build our APIs and SDKs and look after our users and all that sort of stuff. So that's why we choose speakers that have been there, have done that, speakers who are totally new, speakers who run big teams, all sorts of variations of developer relations. So let us get started. But first, I want to thank Vito, who hosts us, and of course, Sinead, who helps run and organize all this event and looks after our speakers and generally keeps me from melting down while we're live. So thank you very much, Sinead. Okay, so what I would like to do now is hand over to our first speaker, and that is Liran. Let me just tell you a little bit about him before he starts. If you don't mind, Liran, you deserve an introduction. So Liran is our first speaker, and we are delighted to have him here. He is a speaker, an author, a GitHub star. Professionally, Liran is a recognized open source security expert, and he's literally written several books on security, O'Reilly Serverless Security, for example. He's an award-winning software developer, security researcher, open source champion, and all sorts of other wonderful things. I think the OpenJS Foundation's Pathfinder for Security security is such a big deal in the Node community. We have our own little special challenges with our registry and our wonderful supply chain that is so deep and so wide. So it's really, really important work to do. His contributions to developer security education include leading OWASP projects, building supply chain security tools, participation in CNCF and OpenSSF initiatives. And he leads the developer advocacy team at Snyk and is on a mission to empower developers with much better application security skills, something that we all need as developers to pay attention to. So tonight he's going to talk to us about the secret life of DevRels. And considering his expertise in security, we can only assume that he's discovered these secrets through clandestine methods. Liran, please take it away.
What a gracious and generous intro. Thank you, Richard. Yeah, so I'm seeing a lot of familiar faces or names on the chat, which is great. So, hey, everyone. Yeah, I guess this is the 31st of May, and you're all just now on the debut of the Secret Life of DevRels, which is kind of what I wanted to share a little bit of how it's been for me when I first started in DevRel a few years back. So that let me get started. Just been the whole introduction here. If you have any questions about any of this, if you want to participate, if you want to follow up and do some stuff together, we'd love to do it. But what really, just DM me or whatever. But really, kind of wanted to specifically narrow in on the job itself, since we're talking about developer advocacy. And for me, it's been a first role when I joined it a few years ago. So maybe let's kind of start with demystifying the whole thing, which is, what is the whole developer relations? And there are different kind of definitions, developer advocates and experience and evangelists, maybe others. There's like developer marketing. There's like a whole wide range of stuff. Some people maybe here or somewhere else have written books about developer relations. There's like definitely some good contents. So it's a lot of mixed kind of activities. But I guess unlike software engineering, maybe where we can all imagine how a typical day looks like, which is I think kind of like that for for developers and for all of us, I guess at one point in time, bit of debugging, design meetings, getting into the zone and writing code. Who else does feel affiliate with that? I know I am. So I wanted to maybe put different perspectives into what it is for me. And so I think if we wanted to define what that is, as my own opinion here, is kind of like the goal that it really plays for the community. And I chose to kind of like follow a quote by Jennifer Riggins when she wrote about this on like a New Stack article. And this is her quote. She was like, the role of developer advocate is basically to help get after developers excited about building on top of your product. And she kind of, talks about the fact that you want to build through meaningful interactions. You want to build through valuable content or education or activities that really do engage and help developers, right? So, doing blog posts or conference talks or something like that actually engages. So, these are some very obvious examples, right? Like maybe you do a blog post on, with Twilio or on Vercel, you do maybe the SDKs and, update the docs for, the Vercel setup. Different kind of ways that developers would actually get value, and that, your interaction as a developer advocate would be somewhat, I guess, intrinsic to how developers have workflows and integrate with them and connect with you eventually. Now, that's like one way of doing it. There's like so many other ways, and there's like the developer relations. There's like the what's called the iceberg model. Amir Shavat has this kind of a flywheel version of it, which is like, hey, there's like, education involved, there's like enablement, so kind of activities that, create more engagement, there's like feedback you can learn from this. And maybe there's like an inspiration part, which I really like at the end, which is kind of like, fuels back into the whole vision of developer relations. So there's like definitely different models, and I'm not going to deep dive into it. I actually wanted to give you more of like a practical day-to-day of what it is like for me. But before that, I wanted to like add one more quote by Phil, which did I lose it? There we go. I think it's, oh, okay, there we go. So it's like developer relations is like the force. You can't see it, you can't feel it. You just have to believe it. So, living up to the whole Yoda hat, I very much appreciate that quote. So what do developer relations people do all day, right? Like we've all kind of like gathered here to hear that. So here's what it trickles down to for me. This is what my developer friends think I do when I tell them I do this job and they pay me. And then colleagues at work, since I'm like never at the office, just events or something else, this is what they think I do all day. And my wife basically thinks that this is what I do all day because I'm not home at all. And then there's like travel and stuff like that. So she's like, yeah, you're running just like everyone else. But in fact, there's like, if if you want to think about the conference travel thing, it's it's a lot harder than it seems, right? You have to like build the whole talk, the whole stress build up part of doing the talk, attending the conference, doing all of those kind of activities, working a lot remotely, whether that's from like very different places, which is, by the way, not just to build a talk, but just like doing some other DevRel activities. So it's not really just that, and I just want to like take that as an example to kind of like lighten the atmosphere. But basically, converting to DevRel is very confusing, and here's how it felt like for me when I was like at my first day at the job at Snyk about maybe 5 years ago or so at this point. And I came from like a very engineering heavy background. I was a team lead, doing the design reviews and coding and whatever. And even though I came from open source communities and working, prior to joining Snyk, I was part of like the Node Foundation, which is today the OpenJS Foundation. It was still very I don't know, confusing or disoriented to like know what it is that you have to do, like, on the first day. What do we do? Like, it's not like you take a blog post, a backlog story, write a blog post, and then do something. It was not as tangible as some engineering software development positions would be. So one of the first things that were kind of like coming on to mind was the fact that there's some work around thought leadership, which means basically, if the company wants to have its mission maybe to drive open source security awareness for developers, then we have to, like, if that's the mission, then what do we actually do? How do we influence that education part for developers? Maybe for example, one example of that is developers chat about dependencies management, and then they remember, or they blog, or they search something on Google, and they end up with landing on a blog at Snyk about maybe log file security or NPM best practices or something like that. And at the end of the day, that's kind of like the thought leadership aspect maybe that you're trying to get. Here's another example of that. Having Snyk, for example, has this state of open source security, which is kind of like this annual survey that we do and database, and we do that as a yearly thing, but it gets used in so many places in terms of the references for security people, for developers at conferences. So there's that. There's collaboration of things that you might be able to do. So if you've got a blog post about something interesting, maybe GitHub would be a really good partner to just work with you on promoting or advancing, right, that open source security mindset, because they connect to the whole mission. So doing all of those together. Then when you go back and you say, well, I'm doing a lot of maybe thought leadership kind of activities as a developer advocate, and I've very fastly here went and chose the advocate rather than the general relations category here. And you say, well, how do you connect that to the business, right? Because a lot of this is also very unseen in terms of, what's the impact. And then one day, kind of like I wake up and I see this in Slack where, this the state of open source security report that that was like my first biggest project, and I've built that with great people at Snyk back in 2019. Was actually very much connected to impacting the business, to help to grow the business. And I think that is kind of like where it lands for me, where there's a lot of like unseen work, but it's not unappreciated or unrecognized. It's just like sometimes not easily tracked or metriced well. So there's that. And then you kind of like go to a conference. I went to like this one of these like open source summit, Europe 2019, and Erica Brescia, back then CEO of Puppets, COO of GitHub, was mentioning some of the open source security of the report highlights in her slides, and this was like a really good moment as well. So there's like a lot of really interesting ways that you can actually influence. There's also the part that kind of like moving to a different concept is kind of like feeling always connected to an extent. So you could imagine what it means, for example, if you're a developer advocate for maybe front-end tooling related, business, or, kind of like activities. And so you'd wonder, what does it mean always connected? So maybe if you build an SDK or a library and you kind of now need to hey, support like the new, right? Like developers will ask you for like, hey, do you support Quick, or the whole Svelte, or like whatever the new front end magic, server side components with React or whatever, right? So like whatever the new thing is, it kind of like always have to feel always connected with like the latest technology, which is like another aspect that I feel I needed to draw myself into as well. For me, it made sense for the security part of it. So, for example, from the security perspectives, it meant that I needed to know and like be on the know on time about any security incidents that were happening. So if there's like even like across different ecosystems, like I never wrote like an app in Ruby. I've coded a bit of a POC for another project, but like not really connected to that community very specifically, but knowing about things that go there and how they end up, and the details, and just like making that story accessible to Ruby developers who use Snyk, for example, is very important. So that's how it ended up as something important for me to like draw myself into those kind of very kind of like latest news on the go, and like literally on the go, because I remember the day that this incident happened, and it was just when we were gonna go out to a team karaoke night with a whole DevRel team, and we ended up taking, of course, laptops and everything with us and working on that story as it broke out during some of the songs. But don't worry, we definitely made sure to have Frozen and Spice Girls in the playlist background for the karaoke. But it was fun and it was great, and I guess you can see how supportive everyone are here. Some are trolling me in the background about Java, but that's life. Another aspect of activities I would guess is the development side of it, right? Like putting kind of like the developer in developer advocacy, and not just the travel. It's not just being on social or writing the blogs or doing security stuff and reports and whatever. And these are all activities that I chose to do. Of course, by no means am I saying this is all that everyone should do. But what I ended up doing, as I still liked coding, is find myself some projects I could build. So I could kind of like take the security aspects and make them accessible to developers through the ways that I saw that made kind of like either fun or some sense. One of those was like I had this like idea on like a weekend to build this CLI tool, since I'm a fan of CLIs, called Is Website Vulnerable? And it literally a CLI do npx is website vulnerable, give it a website, and it will scan it, detect the JavaScript dependencies, the libraries in it, their versions, cross-reference them with the Snyk database, and tell you, hey, you have like old version of AngularJS, jQuery, whatever, I don't know. So it literally, this is the whole thing. It really was a weekend project, hacking, just enjoy the stuff. And it ended up being very popular, which was kind of like surprising because we did not like set up for this being like that. So it got like, thousands of stars and people got engaged. But what I really enjoyed that activity the most is the fact that it really kind of like had a clear call to action to that people were inspired by this. They wanted to do something with it. So I noticed someone was like sharing on Reddit, like a message when I shared this is like, hey, yes, I actually built out like a website based on the CLI and how it works. Like they built this whole vulnerability pages that you did. Like when I did the CLI, they did the whole website thing and it dropped that. It was amazing to see this happening and like nothing I could foresee. Same with other activities or contributions, basically, right, on GitHub for this. So someone said, hey, this is pretty cool. I'm going to write a GitHub action for it. And they ended up doing that. Of course, I was merging this in and it was great. And then someone else said, hey, I'm going to use this website CLI thing in my tests for my repository thing. And this is kind of like the amazing things where you can't always foresee those results. But I think when you create and create room for people to kind of like engage and build together, and those things stack up, they actually see the value. They actually enjoy building together based on whatever the activity is. That could be security or that could be something else. Other examples are going to be engineering blogs. So this is, for example, an idea like about integrity policies. This is like from a few years ago. of like, just making experimental kind of experimental features in the Node maybe project accessible and like let people know about them is a great way to engage as well. Other sorry, other blogs or topics are just as good. And one of my last favorite topics is research. So the fact that you could potentially do a lot of research and then on a topic related to what you're doing on, and then share the results of that. So there's not many sometimes kind of like practical use for it or something, but it's like very, very cool from like inspiring others to like understand and deep dive as well, like you did. And one of the best examples of that I've seen is definitely that of Charlie Gerard, which she's like, very international public speaker, wrote a book about TensorFlow and maybe some other things as well. Super talented, amazing person. And she did this thing back then with Web API and machine learning. And it was so cool and fun. So I kind of like really enjoy following her just because of those kind of inspiring and fun projects. So yeah, there's that. And I guess at the end of it, I kind of want to leave some time for questions and discussions if there's any. Is how do we navigate the whole the spectrum here? But like, how do we go from like doing one to the other? Because there's like so many different skill sets required, and sometimes we don't know where to start. I'm gonna skip this one for a sec, maybe. Let me see if I can. I do want to get into the other one. There we go. So, and you might wonder, right? Like this is one of the things that you might figure out. Like, is it good for me because maybe I'm not a really good developer, maybe I'm not a really good I don't know, public speaker, whatever you want to say, and you're not sure how to navigate maybe all of those activities. So I kind of want to show you something I've seen, which is it's kind of how it felt for me, and maybe you'll relate to it. One is that there's this thing called the reverse comfort zone, right? Which you start from this circle there, which is like, hey, I feel safe and in control. So everyone starts off there. But then they go into like a growth zone, right? Like there's like a whole fear of, hey, I need to like code something. Maybe it's not in a new language that I know to build this SDK. So, kind of like, there's like a bit of, lack of confidence. But then you grow past it, and then you're like now learning and like acquiring new skills. You're like learning the new Go stuff, the new Rust, the new Snyk, whatever, stuff that kind of like, boils down for you. And then you've went into that zone, right? Like you've owned it. Now, the way that DevRel feels for me is not just that model, but it's the fact that it's a very repetitive model, right? Because there is always going to be new supply chain security attacks that I've never heard about before, and I have to like drill down into them. New frameworks, new standards, new spec, new best practices around how to, I don't know, build and secure containers or something. It's always going to be there. So I'm going to end it kind of like with that. I think this is, towards my last slide here. But I think you kind of like have to be comfort in understanding that this is kind of like a repeating theme, and you will always need to learn how to feel confident, not knowing everything, and that's okay. So I do want to, I guess, if we have some time, leave that for questions or anything else that kind of like, jumps up.
Hey, Liran, thank you so much. Super interesting. I am gonna use the host privilege to ask the first question, if that's okay. And while I'm doing that, if you have questions, just pop them in the chat, please. So I really like one thing from the earlier part of your talk, where somebody said to you, when it comes to developer relations, you have to just believe. And then you showed a Slack message a little while later where somebody was saying, yeah, we made a 6-figure sale from your DevRel activities. And I have been in similar situations where I gave a talk at a conference and the sale happened 2 years later. And what I found is in organizations that understand that dynamic, that's marvelous. The leadership understands that DevRel creates those relationships. You don't sell, but you create the possibility for sales. So should we be avoiding metrics altogether? Should we deliberately be avoiding metrics in developer relations because you do have to just believe? Is there a place for metrics?
It sounds like a tricky question, so I'm going to answer it lightly. No, so I think that whatever we could measure, we should. Like, otherwise, you don't know how you're doing, right? Like, it's just that some things are like hard to measure. I don't know, like a conference talk. What's the ROI on that? Like, it's so super hard to like do it. And I do think that like you shouldn't force things to be measured. Plus, let's not forget like this is literally called developer relations, and like we're not gonna put a price on relationships, right? So I think the idea is not what I like about measuring in metrics is not to the extent of is it a sales thing, is it not, like it's more about is something effective, is it working. It's just like you build a product, right? You want to know you're building the right thing. If you're a developer advocate, you want to know you are bringing value through conversations with developers. How would you ever know that you did that well and not just wasting time for other people, not just, I'm not talking about a company, I'm talking about end users. How do you know if you're doing that well if you're not like, say, logging requests, like, people DM me on Twitter say, hey, can Snyk support, I don't know, blah, 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 PNPM, for example. And I go back into the Snyk Slack and say, hey, we kind of need to support that. I have like, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people pinging me, we should do that. And I will measure, how well we're able to, do that, support it, add features or whatever, and get back to those people and the whole thing. So, right, like it's not measuring for, for the sake of measuring. It's for the actual part of, you should be actually making sure you're, delivering some value. And that's what we should. So this is not about trying to measure everything, but have that concept, I think, is very important.
Do you think we need to get to, sorry, I'm pushing my luck here. Do you think we need to get to the kind of a best practices for DevRel metrics? So like in the SaaS world over the last 20 years, there's a standard set of metrics which show actual value. I hear teams and people suffering under, how many hits did you get on your blog posts?
Yep.
Push listicle, right, which is just is not effective at all for what we do. Do you think we need to start looking for those best practice metrics?
I think some of them already exist. Like, so my opinion is I do think that it's useful, for example, to look at metrics for your blog post, because again, you want to make sure that that is getting read. Like if I'm writing an NPM best practices, it's an amazing cheat sheet, but no developers read it. Like it doesn't really help anyone, right? Like I want to know I'm helping people. You could like figure out different ways of doing that, whether that's like later conversion or, I don't know, popping up a message or asking them to, for feedback live on the website or something. But I think you should. And I think for some of the things we do have that, we just like, maybe they're like not as known. Plus there's like so many activities. My team, for example, doesn't actually do like SDKs and stuff like that to like own API endpoints. But obviously there's like a lot of other maybe developer advocate team who are technical for, some other product related companies who may do like, I don't know, monthly active API calls or something like that. They want to know that the SDK that they built, and building software usually takes a little bit longer than building a blog post. Then you want to know that developers are actually using, I don't know, your endpoints, your SDKs. Otherwise, you're just like, spending a ton of time building, maintaining, software, and maybe no one uses something there. Maybe there's a good reason, by the way, I don't know, but like that's why you kind of need the metrics. You need to know, like, is it getting used? Is it not? Is this like some awful endpoint that people have like a ton of troubles with, which is why they never use it. But if you don't measure, you never know that.